Canon was interviewed by Phototrend last month at CP Plus, the photo and video trade show in Yokohama, Japan. Canon spoke candidly about the Canon EOS R1, a global shutter, and supporting third-party lens makers, providing us with more detail than previously. But before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. At CP Plus last week, Canon spoke to Damien of Phototrend. Damien asked about the progress that had been made with third-party lens makers. I want to clarify that as we speak, there are no third-party RF lenses with autofocus available. As you know, we have not adopted an open strategy. Are you confused? It does seem to contradict what we've heard in the past, right? Didn't Canon in the past say that they have opened up the mount, that there are no restrictions? Well, here's a quote from Canon just last year. Canon has already opened up the RF mount to third-party lens makers through licensing. If we receive a request to open the mount from a third-party lens maker, we will consider whether to license it according to Canon's own business plan and strategy. To which Canon further added in that same interview that they are doing so on a case-by-case basis. And what resulted from that? Well, you saw it. We got 2 lenses released over 2022. In fact, they came late October and November of 2022. Sorry, 2023. 2023, not 2022. So what does this mean in terms of support for third-party lens makers? All that discussion about a couple of weeks ago about no restrictions on Canon third-party lens makers and all that we're moving quickly, that we're more involved in the process? Well, we do have some positive news, but what this seems to contradict is what Canon had said before about the mount being opened, and many of us believed that that wasn't true. I mean, after all, 2 lenses in a year, and Sigma and others not giving us anything definitive, that they were being more or less, well, vague at best. Well, when Damien pressed Canon a little bit further about support for third-party lens makers, this is what Canon had to say. Although we have more than 40 lenses available in our current catalog, we need diversity in our offering to satisfy customer needs. This means we are currently communicating a lot more than last year with third-party lens makers. I can see some of your comments now. I told you that Canon wasn't serious about opening up the RF mount, and yeah, that certainly looks like the case. What we heard last year around CP Plus from an interview with Phototrend and Canon, it appeared that they were opening up the mount, that they're doing it on a case-by-case basis, and we would see a flood of lenses very soon. Well, apparently that was all lies, and that they weren't opening up the amount. They weren't opening up the mount. They just said so in this interview, and that's a little bit frustrating. So based on what we're hearing from Canon now, in this interview with Phototrend and previous interviews in the last couple of weeks, when are we going to get third-party lens makers making RF lenses with autofocus? Who are going to be making these lenses? Will it be Sigma? Will it be Tamron, Samyang, or others? Well, all that Canon was able to say is that they have a confidentiality agreement with other lens manufacturers regarding the types of lenses to be released. The types of lenses to be released, that's key. And of course, their positioning in the market. But I can't say more. The types of lenses and their position in the marketplace. Okay, so this shouldn't take an awful lot of haggling and negotiating, because if we take a look at Canon's lineup, what do we see? A lot of high-end L-series glass. The 50mm f1.2, which I'm shooting with right now, the 100 to 500mm, which is a very good high-quality zoom lens. Then we have the recently announced 200 to 800, alongside the 24 to 105 f2.8. And there's an awful lot of lenses I could talk about, the 100 to 300 and many others, but it's pretty clear that Canon has an awful lot of these high-end lenses. But if we take a look at the more affordable segment, what we see are an awful lot of kit lenses, an awful lot of low-end pancake primes, and when we do see a super telephoto like the 800mm, it's approaching $1,000, and you know, you've got some pretty significant handicaps, such as it's an f11. It starts at f11 and it finishes at f11. The only way to go to f22, oh, it's already over here on my 200 to 800, is to use an extender, and that's a little bit frustrating. So when we take a look at Sigma's lineup, for example, we see a lot of primes that are f1.4 that are very affordable. The Sigma 35mm f1.4, for example, is one of those lenses. And then we take a look at the 70 to 200mm, and we see the 150 to 600mm, We see price points all the way, and a lot of the price points around $300 to $600, and then we see other price points increasing as we go into more difficult lenses to engineer. And that's why I think this is the perfect synergy between these two companies. Canon makes a lot of high-end glass, and they can continue focusing on that and coming out with innovative lenses like the 200 to 800 millimeter here. And then where Sigma comes in is they offer fast wide open primes that aren't optically as good as Canon's L series, but they give the rest of us lenses that we can afford, and we realize they're not as optically good as, let's say, the 100 to 300 or the 50 millimeter f1.2, but at prices starting at $2,200, $2,300 and easily going up past $3,000, and that 800 millimeter f5.6 at around $16,000. Sigma clearly, and Tamron, and Shenyang, and many others are offering many more options to us that, well, we just couldn't afford if we were left up to buying Canon L series glass. So when talking about the types of lenses, one thing Canon might do is say, okay, you know what, you can't touch primes at f1.2. You can't go any higher than f1.4. That's it, you're stuck there, that's as wide open as you can go, which really wouldn't be a problem because, well, Sigma doesn't have many of those lenses anyways. And this is something we might see, and it's quite plausible, restrictions that aren't really going to affect you and I. Now, if it's not wide and fast enough that I might like, such as an f1.2, well, I'm going to do what I've done in the past and buy f1.2s from Canon's L series. And if you can't afford the f1.2 that Canon makes, whether it be the 85 millimeter or the 50 millimeter, that's okay because you're willing to spend and buy the 35 millimeter f1.4 from Sigma and give it to you at a much more affordable price that those cons really aren't going to get in the way. And I really do hope that we're pretty close to an announcement, but from what Canon has said in the past couple of weeks, and again at CP Plus, is that they're much more involved in this process. They're taking a hands-on approach and they want to get things done, but to see an announcement this month, unless it's some sort of development announcement to say that they've come to an agreement with Sigma and that we may not see lenses for another year, that's maybe plausible, but I think what we're looking at is some sort of announcement, development or otherwise, in the second half of 2024 or even the first quarter of 2025. This would explain why companies like Sigma are unable to give us anything but nebulous statements stating that they would love to comment on what's coming on the future with RF lenses, but simply can't. All right, now let's turn our attention to the global shutter. Global shutters have been around for a long time, but it wasn't until Sony announced the A9 Mark III that it really started to get a lot of attention. And of course, we had the Red V Raptor X and XL with a global shuttered sensor with considerably better dynamic range, offering a base of 17 stops and going all the way up to 20 stops. When Damien asked Canon about their global shutter, Canon says that there are negative points and the image quality is affected. Sensitivity management isn't very good and the dynamic range is less extensive. And I think we would have difficulty optimizing this because of the very complex structure of this type of sensor. Now that to me seems pretty clear that Canon isn't ready to release a camera with a global shutter sensor. Not in the R1, not in the R5 Mark II, and certainly not in the R3 Mark II, at least based on what they're saying here. But I do find fault with what Canon said about dynamic range with global shutter sensors. Now perhaps Sony is having problems getting that dynamic range, and perhaps Canon is having the same problem, but Red in their V Raptor X and XL and 8K cinema camera, well, they can achieve at least 17 stops of dynamic range, and with a certain capability that does reduce the frame rates, will allow them to go up to 20 stops of dynamic range. But now it's time to turn our attention to the Canon EOS R1, the flagship mirrorless camera that's been dubbed the master of everything and the jack of all trades. When Damien pushed further about a global shutter in the Canon EOS R1, Canon said, if we have to integrate this into our flagship product, we want to have complete technology, philosophy. Okay, does that statement leave a little bit of wiggle room that Canon's left the door open just a little bit on a global shutter with the Canon EOS R1 but doesn't want to let on? Well, I don't really get that. I get the sense that, you know, for them to publish, or not publish, but to release a camera, to announce a camera, to make it available for shipping, it needs to be a complete camera and not go through the same problems they had with the Canon EOS R5 that they had to release firmware after firmware after firmware just to bring it up to a point where it would stop overheating, and that took up to firmware 1.6. Now, I think what Canon's saying here is that global shutters, well, they're not just quite ready enough, not ready enough certainly to go in the flagship mirrorless camera, the Canon EOS R1, but perhaps just leaving the door open a little bit to keep us guessing as to what is going to go in that camera. So at the end of the day here, we have Canon telling us a little bit more about third-party lens makers and that they are working harder with these companies to get something to happen, and they understand the need for diversity in the lens lineup. But it does, they're looking at the types of lenses that are going to be made available and also certain segments within the marketplace. And of course, that global shutter technology, at least as far as Canon is concerned, isn't ready, doesn't offer enough detail or dynamic range, and it's most likely not going to come in the Canon EOS R1, but leaving the door open just a little bit for interpretation. From what Canon has said in the past couple of weeks, and again at CP Plus, is that they're much more involved in this process. They're taking a hands-on approach and they want to get things done, but to see an announcement this month, unless it's some sort of development announcement to say that they've come to an agreement with Sigma and that we may not see lenses for another year, that's maybe plausible, but I think what we're looking at is some sort of announcement, development or otherwise, in the second half of 2024 or even the first quarter of 2025. It's great that Canon's opening up and talking a little bit more, and yeah, hopefully these statements are real, because again, the statements they gave us last year led us to believe that they had already opened up the mount and were just pursuing negotiations on a case-by-case basis. But that wasn't the case. There were restrictions. You couldn't produce autofocus lenses, and that turned off many lens makers. And of course, it turned off you, and it turned off others. Now, some of us, like myself inclusive, because I have a channel here, it's very important to cover some of the best of the best. And if I'm going to talk about high-end cameras such as the R5 and the R1 and the type of lenses, I need to be able to purchase them and shoot with them. So that's why I buy a lot of those. But that doesn't mean to say that I don't appreciate Sigma, Tamron, and others, because if I didn't have this channel, there's no way I'd have the 50mm f1.2, let alone the 100 to 500. I probably would say for the 200 800 though, because at $18.99, well, that isn't cheap. It's a pretty incredible lens, but we'll talk about more on that later. And if you're interested in purchasing camera gear from B&H, Adorama, and Amazon.com, any of the lenses that I've talked about or any other camera gear, because right now, I keep getting people asking me about sales on right now. The Canon EOS R3 is still on sale, $44.99 at Adorama and B&H. You can also see the R5 new price point of $29.99 and sorry, let me try this again. At Adorama, that includes a CF Express Type B card as well as a card reader. Now, the same price for the R5 at B&H, but you don't get the card reader and the storage. So still, pretty impressive deals that we see out there. And it's not just on Canon gear, we see it on Panasonic. Huge sales there, which lead us to believe that something is coming. Lots of sales on Nikon as well as Sony. So if you just want to pick my affiliate links down below, these ones right here, I do have them in the description where you can copy and paste them. And even if it takes you to a page that isn't exactly what you're looking for, like you click on the R3 page, just do a search for Sony and I still get credit for that. So I really do appreciate everybody that has used my affiliate links, because I do get anywhere from 2 to 12% back. And that really does help this channel grow. It's what has propelled me to such incredible growth in the last couple of years and allowed me to buy lenses such as the 200 to 800 so I can talk to you what it's like to shoot with these firsthand. And while the weather's terrible right now, I have been able to shoot at night. I captured the moon just a few days ago, and last month I got it full as well as a partially lit. And I like it when it's partially lit because I find there's a whole lot more contrast as the sun is hitting the craters from an angle, creating shadows and providing a bit more depth. Do you notice that here? There's more depth here because with the full moon, we have the sun hitting it dead on. And that's why when shooting video, quite often what we do is we light the scene so that the subject isn't lit evenly, that we have more light on this side with the key light than the fill light. And that's how I have my channel lit right now. I have my key light here and my fill light here. So you'll see there's a slight difference in contrast. And that's why we watch this. Watch, if you're not familiar with this, what's your favorite TV show or movie, and just notice the level of difference between the key light and the fill light. It's pretty significant. And if you want to stay up to date on all the latest and greatest when it comes to camera gear news and rumors, then don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. Well, I should start calling it X now, because today already I released 2 tweets that I didn't bother putting out a video on because they weren't quite big enough to have their own separate video. So that's what I do with tweets. Sometimes I just put out the ramblings of a mad old man, and sometimes it's some really incredible pricing information, such as the Canon EOS R3. We're now $1,500 off its release price, $44.99 for the R series. And if you want the global shutter, you spend a little bit more. You go up to Sony's A9 Mark III, which is considerably more, but you get a global shutter, and that isn't something to be ignored. Now, you do have to be a certain type of photographer for this, because there is some lack of detail, and in terms of ISO response, it's not as good as traditional stack sensors. Although give Sony some time, and I'm sure that will change. But that's it for now. Have yourself a great weekend. It's sunny, it's beautiful here, and spring is here in much of North America. I can't believe it. We really didn't have much of a winter. We did have an awful lot of precipitation, but almost all of it came in the form of rain. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.